Hey guys, John V here from PhoneArena. Right now you're watching our in-depth video comparison between the Nokia Lumia 1020 and the Apple iPhone 5, two wonderful flagship devices from their respective companies. As you know, the Lumia 1020, it's most notable for its 41 megapixel PureView camera. And of course, the iPhone 5 is the iPhone. It's an all-around contender. So we're going to pit these two and see how they fare against one another. Obviously, these two handsets sport very iconic designs that make them stand out, but the iPhone 5 is just easier to handle just because it's the lightweight and thinner between the two. And you notice it most in the back where the Lumia 1020's camera stands out prominently. When you hold them in the hand, it just feels a little bit awkward with the Lumia 1020. Your fingers kind of brush up against that bezel in the back, so it does make it feel a little bit strange. The iPhone 5 is completely flat, of course, and you have more of a premium element with the iPhone 5's choice of materials, the brushed aluminum casing versus the polycarbonate matte finish of the Lumia 1020. It's really hard to say which display we prefer more just because there's so many lovable qualities about both that we like. With the Lumia 1020, it's a 4.5-inch PureMotion HD Plus display with clear black AMOLED, and its resolution stands at 1280 by 768 pixels. In contrast, the iPhone 5 has the smaller display, 4-inch Retina display, and its resolution stands at 1136 by 640 pixels. So when you do the math, the pixel density number count goes to the Lumia 1020, but it's only by a small margin, and honestly you're not going to notice the difference just because they're able to produce such crisp and detailed looking text in the web browser, so it's no problem with that. The other aspect is just color reproduction. It's an IPS LCD panel in the iPhone 5 versus an AMOLED on the Lumia 1020, and you get more realistic tones out of the iPhone 5, whereas it's more saturated in nature with the Lumia 1020. When it comes to outdoor usage, we find that the iPhone 5 to be a lot easier to view just because of its stronger brightness output, and the viewing angles are both pretty much the same on the two handsets. The other thing worth noting about Lumia 1020 is that it's also super sensitive, so that you could actually use gloves and you'll still be able to actually interact with it. You have capacitor buttons on the Lumia 1020, and you have a physical recessed home button on the iPhone 5. Both work well. We didn't have any issues with either. Meanwhile, above the displays, you have their earpieces, you have the light and proximity sensors, and you have the same 1.2 megapixel front-facing cameras. When it comes to physical buttons, both handsets have a reasonable amount of tactility, but it's the iPhone 5 set that are a little bit more raised and more distinguishable to the touch, but we do appreciate that there's a dedicated shutter key on the Lumia 1020. It's no surprise that we prefer the micro USB port on the Lumia 1020 just because it's a little bit more standardized versus the Lightning docking port on the iPhone 5. And finally, we come to the cameras. The Lumia 1020 is most notable for its beefy camera, a 41 megapixel PureView camera, which features a host of technology. You have backside illuminated sensor in there, f2.2 lens, optical image stabilization, utilizes Zeiss optics. You even have an LED and xenon flashes to really complement its capacity. In contrast, the iPhone 5 still has a very admirable one. It's not as immense in terms of the megapixel count, but it's actually an 8 megapixel iSight camera, which features an f2.4 lens, also backside illuminated sensor, and an LED flash. It shouldn't shock anyone, especially nowadays, but there's no way to actually remove the batteries on both devices just because they feature closed designs. At the same time, there's no way to increase their storage capacities as well. It's 32 gigabytes on the Lumia 1020, and as we know with the iPhone 5, you can pick it up in either 16, 32, or 64 gigabyte capacities. With the Lumia 1020, it's worth noting that you could get wireless charging, but you have to pick up a separate accessory for that. Visually, we'll admit that the Lumia 1020 and its Windows Phone 8 experience is by far the more attractive one between the two, thanks to its very dynamic-looking start screen, where you have all your live tiles that aggregate a bunch of useful content, versus the more static look of the iOS experience on the iPhone 5. But iOS definitely has a deeper functionality. For example, we prefer its notification system, by far more useful than what Windows Phone 8 has. And on top of that, it's just faster to switch between between all the open applications, and you have also access to the music player functions and even a lock, orientation lock directly from there. In order to do multitasking with the Lumia 1020, you got to hold down the back button, and of course you could switch. It's not as fast versus what you have here with iOS, but still useful. And the other thing is just the apps ecosystem. No question about it, iOS has far better looking apps than Windows Phone 8. Very useful too, and you can see it even in some of the popular applications, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, and you're going to get far more offerings with the iOS experience. These two handsets perfectly show us that you really don't need the most cutting-edge hardware to have the best performance. You have a 1.5 GHz dual-core Qualcomm Snapdragon S4 Plus processor with 2 GB of RAM on the Lumia 1020, and on the iPhone 5, it's a 1.3 GHz Apple A6 processor with 1 GB of RAM. Now you can tell, very fluid in tracking our finger. There's barely any stutter or any lag that we see with either device, and they both handle the same operations in pretty much the same fashion. Very quick and responsive. Definitely like that. And we really can't say there's a definitive winner as to which device is the faster between the two. Mainly due to its larger display, you get a more spacious keyboard layout on the Lumia 1020, and you could tell the difference between the two. It's very drastic. But with the Lumia 1020, when you're actually using it, holding your hand, just because of the way you hold it, your fingers come across the bezel of the camera. It makes it a little bit strange actually typing, but luckily its autocorrect feature and its responsiveness kind of helps out. And that's the same thing we could say about the iPhone 5's keyboard here too. Even though it's smaller and more cramped, we definitely appreciate how it's also super responsive and has a pretty good autocorrect feature as well. At the same time, you really can't go wrong surfing the web on either device just because they both feature 4G LTE connectivity, so you get fast page loads. On top of that, very good performance out of the two. You could tell with navigational controls and even kinetic scrolling, it is nice and buttery smooth, and page rendering is pretty much instantaneous too. We really appreciate the spiffy looks that both music players offer. With the iPhone 5, you have cover flow mode, so you have that cool 3D effect when you're actually browsing through all your cover albums. It's nice. And the same thing can be said about the modern UI that's in use with the music player on the Lumia 1020. As far as the audio quality, it's hands down a winner for the Lumia 1020. Just a more commanding presence with its audio quality. We'll go ahead and say it, just because of that AMOLED display, the Lumia 1020 is by far the more appealing looking device for watching videos. Not only do you have a larger display, but those vibrant colors really stand out when you're watching videos for an extended amount of time. If you want that precise level of control when you're taking photos, there's no question about it, you want to stick with the Lumia 1020, especially when you look at the camera UIs on both. With the iPhone 5 and iOS, very elementary with its offerings. The only thing you can modify here is just you have an option for HDR mode and panoramic. That's pretty much it. In contrast, the Lumia 1020 has a lot of stuff going on with it. For example, you could adjust stuff like ISO, the white balance, the shutter speed, even the focus with the camera app, and on top of that, there's a lot of very cool looking effects you could do afterwards that are available with the Lumia 1020. The iPhone 5 has always remained a strong competitor when it comes to taking photos, especially with its 8-megapixel iSight camera, but it's been eclipsed by the 41-megapixel PureView camera of the Lumia 1020, and the results are pretty much predictable. You just get far better looking photos in terms of details, color reproduction, and just overall wow factor is present with the Lumia 1020, and it also handles low lighting conditions far better too. It's able to draw out a lot of the details that would otherwise be lost. And at the same time, the xenon flash is more potent than the LED flash of the iPhone 5. Frankly, both handsets are able to take some stunning looking videos with the respective cameras. Their 1080p video quality is just absolutely lovely, and they're definitely up there in a greater scheme of smartphones. But the advantage goes again to the Lumia 1020 just because it just wins in pretty much every category, from details, color reproduction, exposure. There's just a lot to like about it. And on top of that, it's also worth noting with the Lumia 1020 you have more features too. You have the ability to shoot video in 24 frames per second, so you get that cinematic look. And on top of that, you have that lossless zoom feature, so you can zoom in to certain things noise without any degradation to quality. Generally speaking, call quality is more than passable on both handsets just because voices are clear and distinctive, but the Lumia 1020's earpiece is just a little bit on the weaker side, so you really gotta mash it against your ear to hear your callers. Honestly, these aren't the class leaders when it comes to battery life, but we're still able to get by through an 8-hour work shift, no problems whatsoever. So whether you're a light, moderate, or power user, you'll get by. But when it comes to the overall battery life, we find that the iPhone 5 inches out its rival. We're able to get by through one whole day out of its full battery tank, whereas with the Lumia 1020, it usually ends around the 18-hour mark. Let's talk about price point now. We know that the Lumia 1020 is coming out of the gate sporting a $300 on-contract price. Now that is super expensive when you think about pricing for flagship devices, but think about it like this. It's 32 gigabytes of storage you're getting out of this, and when you compare that to the 32 gigabyte version of the iPhone 5, they're identical, $300 for both, but as we know, you could buy the 16 gigabyte version on contract for only $200. So it's a matter of whether or not you love photos. That's essentially what's going to come down to, just because the Lumia 1020 just wins in that particular category. Taking photos, shooting video, it's a beast in this particular thing. But the iPhone 5 is still the more rounded device between the two. It still takes some stunning looking photos and videos, but at the same time, you have that premium construction combined with the rich ecosystem of iOS over Windows Phone 8. So it is an all-around contender. So it's a matter of whether or not those photos and videos is most pertinent to you. So if you'd like to learn more about either handsets, guys, you could check out our website, PhoneArena.com. This is John V. Thanks for watching.